Good morning and welcome to the 8th meeting of the Local Government and Communities Committee in 2020, and can I remind everyone present to turn off their mobile phones. We've received apologies today from Jeremy Balfour. And agenda item 1 is consideration of whether to take agenda item 4 in private. Item 4 is consideration of evidence heard today from the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland. Are we all agreed? Thank you. That is agreed. Agenda item 2. The committee will take evidence on the Commissioner for Ethical Standards in Public Life in Scotland's annual report and accounts. And today I welcome Caroline Anderson, Ethical Standards Commissioner, Ian Bruce, Public Appointments Manager, and Martin Campbell, Director of Investigations and Solicitor to the Commissioner. I invite the Commissioner to make some brief opening remarks, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to present evidence to the committee here today. As it's my first such evidence session, I would like to open with a short introductory statement outlining the steps that I've taken over the past 10 months as I've been in post of Commissioner in relation to complaints handling. This more recent information will give the committee an up-to-date picture as the annual report relates to 2018-19 before I was appointed. I am of course ready to answer questions on the annual report to the best of my ability. I also have senior members of my team here to address any points of detail. I'm a qualified chartered accountant with expertise in regulation and compliance developed over 3 decades, spanning public and private sector roles in professional services and financial services, both in local jurisdictions and internationally. When I took up office on the 1st of April 19, I reviewed operations and found the situation with councillor complaints to be significantly in arrears. The outstanding investigation legacy dated back to August 2018 and was of great concern to me. Having held many quasi-judicial and determinative roles, including disciplinary tribunal and investigative roles focused on code of conduct, I have extensive experience in this area. That experience makes me acutely aware of the negative impact of protracted investigation completion times on those elected representatives involved. At the 1st of April 2019, this legacy equated to the average number of reports submitted to the Standards Commission in an 18-month period. I have a small office and the levels of post-vacancy were at critically low when I took over. The situation was made even more pressing by the upcoming expansion of investigation work to include sexual harassment and inappropriate behaviour complaints, and an overall backdrop of rising complaint volumes. I had to implement a recovery plan very quickly to avoid further delays and to secure greater effectiveness and efficiency in complaints handling in order to be ready for increased demand. Previously, my office had predominantly used home-based variable hours contractors as investigators, each working an average of only 10 hours each per week. With full SPCB approval, I moved quickly to recruit full-time on-site investigators who have come highly recommended from former Scottish public sector employers and international and local law firms. They include qualified lawyers and experienced investigators with outstanding skills and qualifications. My new senior investigating officer, Mr. Campbell, took up post in June 2019, and the other new full-time investigators took up post in December 2019. This team is moving quickly through investigations, producing high calibre work. In moving to full-time investigators, it has been possible to double the annual working hours available to more effectively service complaints investigations. Additionally, both complainers and respondents are now benefiting from having a dedicated full-time on-site investigator servicing their complaint. We've already received notable positive feedback on this greatly enhanced service. These changes address a long-standing issue regarding length of time taken to complete investigations, as raised by various stakeholders over the years. I am also aware that my office budget has come under scrutiny by this committee in past years. The move to full-time investigators has doubled available investigation hours whilst reducing salary costs by $75,000. These new salaries are in line with a regrading exercise carried out with the support of the SPCB. Former investigators had preserved rights from prior public sector posts with an associated high price tag. Apologies, due to HR and data protection issues concerning individuals in a small office, I can't go into much more detail than that. In addition to putting the new staff in place, I've overseen work to put the many years delayed case management system into operation. In addition, all IT hardware and software has been replaced as required, creating a robust platform from which to deliver a newly effective and efficient complaints handling approach. Since the 1st of April 2019, incoming complaints have significantly increased. At the 31st of December last year, councillor complaints were up by over 90% pro rata, with councillor case numbers being up by 50%. MSP complaints had also substantially increased, with cases up approximately 100% on the previous period, pro rata. Despite this increase and the fact that the new IOs are only in post since December, MSP complaints are up to date and the vast majority of councillor complaints have been assessed through to the last few weeks' intake. To conclude my coverage of complaints investigation, I would like to alert the members to the heightened complexity and gravitas of the incoming complaints that we're handling. For the first time since the relevant legislation was enacted some 2 decades ago, my office has, over the past 6 months, commenced 4 cases which required an interim report with potential suspension of the councillor concerned, pending full investigation. This represents a significant escalation in legal complexity and profile of our casework. Thank you for the opportunity to make these opening remarks. I look forward to answering your questions and will welcome any feedback on my strategic plan, which covers all of the functions of my office for the rest of my tenure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Can you give us, you spoke about the fact there was a backlog when you came in and that you've changed practices, etc. Can you give us an update on the current levels of backlog and caseload?
Basically, at this point in time, we have assessed 95% of all incoming complaints, 270 complaints. So 95% of them have been assessed and the rest are being actively worked on. So the assessments are up to date. In terms of the actual investigations, I have handled it to manage it, to manage both the backlog and the new incoming complaints at high volume. I've managed it in different streams. So I have a stream of high priority complex casework, which Mr. Campbell handles. And then I have the balance of casework. So in total, that accounts for about 20 cases at this point in time, 20 live matters at this time.
So would that be part of the refreshing the case system then, the way that you've the different ways that you've
streaming it? Yes. I've taken much more control of the body of complaints. Basically, would you like me to talk through the approach that I'm taking to?
Not
sorry.
in great detail, no.
No. So yes, in the streaming of the casework, I'm able to prioritise. So generally, we're working through the cases, both legacy and new received since the 1st of April in chronological order. But then any day, a new priority matter can come up. So basically in these streams and through daily meetings with the investigation officers, I can control what's being worked on and change priority and allocation at any given moment.
So, and you're finding that that's
very flexible, very
effective.
Flexible, absolutely, having everyone on site.
Okay, and what about the impacts of updating the IT systems and, you know, the full complement of staff? How much difference has that made?
Oh, it's just incomparable, really. It's the staff that make the difference.
So would that be the main driver on the fact that you've managed to close the backlog so much?
The main driver is having the staff to close the backlog and to also deal with the incoming higher volume of complaints, which, as I say, is nearly doubled.
Okay, my colleague's going to go on and talk to you about the complaint system just now. Okay, Sarah, do you want to come in?
Yes, thanks. Good morning, Commissioner. Just as you were closing your opening remarks, you made a comment about the complexity of cases that were coming towards you, in addition to the quite a significant increase, I think, in relation to complaints about councillors. Do you want to say a little bit more about, you said, I think it was heightened complaints and the gravitas of those complaints. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Surely. You'll appreciate that councillors are involved in wide-ranging, complex government business, and therefore the complaints that come in reflect that degree of complexity. However, anecdotally, I would say that the complexity of complaints which have multiple issues involved in them is on the increase. We're receiving complaints that have overlapping legal issues and legal cases involved in them. We're receiving complaints which have a deluge of documentation, sometimes in excess of 1,000 pages coming into us, attached to a complaint. As stated, I mentioned that the members asked me about the interim suspension reports. Obviously, the interim suspension reports are linked to matters which are high public interest and potentially require a suspension of a member, so that reflects the gravitas involved there. And again, being high public interest, there's great social media and press attention, which then sort of ripples out in the complexity of handling the entire matter. Yes, I think that's the landscape that we're working in, and the volume almost doubled in terms of the complaints through the door at the 31st of the 12th. So
yeah, that's
thank you.
It's quite a striking statistic, but it's also quite interesting to hear about the increasingly complicated nature.
Yes, I think it's that complexity is the key, you know. So the case numbers, the complaint numbers could be up another 100 when we go back to the office. But if it's a simple single matter, then that doesn't add so much. Whereas one matter with multiple issues and huge document load is a big job.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Graham, you want to come in and then
Yeah, thanks, convener. Just to follow up on that, there's some really interesting stuff there. So a couple of questions. Why do you think the volume has gone up as much as it has, and why do you think you're getting these increasingly complex cases? I mean, you know, if you're getting something with 1,000 pages, that's incredible.
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to analyse the why. My job is more to respond, and certainly something that I have identified is that I can't expect the complainers to be experts on codes of conduct and legislation, but my means of interacting with them is the complaint form. So I've embarked on a project to refresh the complaint form, to try to walk the complainer through the different points that would be relevant potentially to them in putting together a complaint. And that hopefully manages expectations and perhaps reduces the number of complaints coming through to us, which fall away once they undergo assessment. I'm also considering having a limit on the number of pages of documentation which are initially submitted with a complaint to try to make them relevant and not take up lots of staff time at that initial point. Obviously, we're open to accepting, you know, whatever documentation it takes once we've looked at the complaint.
Yeah, but but to get 1,000 pages, I mean, I don't know anyone who has the time to put together that. I mean, what's the nature of these complaints? Where are they coming? Are they coming from professional people, or are they fellow councillors who are complaining? I can't imagine any of them have time to put together 1,000 pages.
I apologise. You see me struggling because I obviously am under a burden of confidentiality, so I'm being very careful that I'm not talking about anything that's still live. So if I would say to you that often a complex situation that we get caught up in is where complainers have perhaps been to other offices or used other complaint services and are unhappy with the outcome from that, and then bring a huge volume of material from the back and forth that they've had from another body and bring that to us, you know. So that's one possible formation that can shape a complaint into being a very large one.
I'm not asking you to tell us about individual cases. We can't do that. I'm trying to get a feel for the nature of the complaints. I mean, if we've had complaints have doubled, is there a particular nature of complaint? I mean, are we getting, maybe it's to do with sexual harassment cases?
Well, we have had some sexual harassment cases coming through since I took up office, but I couldn't say that that was in any way, you know, part of that volume increase. And I think I would be happy to provide members with a breakdown once we get to the financial or the accounting year end, which is only a few weeks away. I'd be happy to put together a full breakdown of the nature of the complaints involved. Certainly, my feeling for it would be that there are lots of respect-related complaints.
Okay.
They often come from social media and press, where you know, there's been a political comment, a political debate of some type, and that's caused a complainer to think that the line of respect has been passed. However, often on assessment, we'll find that where there was a political nexus to that matter, that it will be covered by Article 10, and therefore that the complaint will fall away.
Yeah.
Again, that's what I'm hoping to do in my complaint form, to perhaps try to use user-friendly, plain English, to sort of explain that, so that we manage expectations. And so the social media and the press coverage is certainly, and the respect and courtesy all work together there to create a volume of complaints. Would you mind if I just turn to my senior investor? Would there be any other body of complaints, Martin, that you feel would be worth mentioning to the members?
Shall I ask about disrespect now then?
Oh, maybe they don't.
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Campbell, sorry.
Thank you. I would just reiterate what the Commissioner said. There's a wide variety. Dignity and respect does seem, anecdotally, from being on the ground looking at the cases, to be a large chunk of it. A lot of that is social media generated. In terms of going back to your question about who's making these complaints, I think it is in the accounts that the vast majority do come from members of the public, rather than it being councillor on councillor or an MSP.
Okay.
We don't harvest any data about what those members of the public's background is as such to identify that any further.
Whether they're being prodded or prompted to make the complaint, which does happen.
Well, the motivation isn't something that's covered in the code, so yes.
Okay. I might ask you about disrespect later, but I think we want to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Andy?
Convener, can I just pick up on what you said earlier about the volume of complaints doubling? Can you confirm that just because the volume of complaints has doubled doesn't mean to say that the volume of those complained about has doubled? You could have large numbers of complaints about one.
Right, yes, indeed. The number of cases, perhaps the more illuminating figure is that at the 31st of December, the number of cases had gone up 50%. 50. So that more reflects the amount of workload, let's say, that is there, and the number of councillors being complained about. So yes, that's pro rata, of course. When we get to the year end, that might have, so fallen away a bit. It's impossible to say until we're there.
Okay, thanks. Last year when I asked your predecessor, Mr. Thompson, as to whether he had received any complaints in relationship to sexual harassment, he said that there'd been none. Which somewhat surprised me because there were surveys at that time and there have been surveys since then showing that there are incidents taking place. within councils, that stay. Have you had, and can you tell me how many complaints you have had in relation to sexual harassment?
A couple is all I would be able to say at this point, and they certainly do fall definitely under that heading. So it has not been the large volume increase that was perhaps anticipated from the survey of the Parliament staff, you know.
You know, the survey I'm referring to is some surveys of council staff. Is it the case that you have no jurisdictional role in promoting the fact that your office exists and is there to receive complaints of this nature and promote the existence of your office and the willingness of yourself to investigate complaints? Is that something you can do?
Well, I'm not aware of any particular restriction on self-promotion. Certainly we don't take complaints ourselves. We accept complaints that come in. There seems to be some confusion out there. Terms like ethics watchdog, you know, so there seems to be some confusion around the nature of the regulatory mechanism and what I do as opposed to the tribunal body that I submit my breach reports to, you know, so there does seem to be an element of confusion. I'm not aware, Mr. Campbell would confirm that there's nothing in the legislation to stop me promoting myself, other than budget, I suppose. But the website's there with information upon it. I suppose one thing that I do feel is missing from the website is like a case book reflecting on learnings from the various different cases that I have assessed and reported on. Because there isn't a particular power given to me to publish, that isn't something that has been done, particularly as the issues with GDPR, etc., have come this past few years. So whereas in other local jurisdictions, I see that my equivalents are able to put together a case book where they share what are likely to be the learnings available from the various cases. I feel that would be a way to support and assist councillors in considering their position vis-a-vis various behaviours. So that would be something that I would like to do and may promote the office in the manner that you're referring to.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I have to confess that often I have to remind myself about the various offices that exist and their different roles. It is a slightly confusing landscape. I mean, I've been speaking to councillors, in particular female councillors who've been victims of sexual harassment, quite serious cases, and asked them if they're aware of the complaints mechanism that's available to them. And without exception, they were not. I'm not blaming them for that. It's just, and maybe they wouldn't want to complain anyway. But there may be some work needing to be done, particularly within councils and councillors, to make them aware that the code of conduct is something that the councillor can be held to account over on any matter.
Surely, perhaps, sorry, just to come back on that, if I may, just to say that we've recently been reviewing the revised code of conduct, and I see that sexual harassment is now specifically referred to within that, and presumably the councils will be doing some training on that, and the Standards Commission also has a role in providing training. So through those two mechanisms, one would hope that the councillors will be better advised on what can or can't happen in terms of complaints arising from the code.
Okay, well, one would hope so. Let's see. I just want to ask a question. You were, or a spokeswoman for yourself was quoted in the Press and Journal earlier this month, or rather last month on February the 8th, and this was to do with an article about Councillor Alan Donnelly in Aberdeen City Council. And you said the article was about the fact that a large number of complaints had come in, and the spokeswoman for your office said that being a very small organisation with limited resources, the Commissioner may on occasion administer a case in a given manner with a view to optimising administrative efficacy. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. Obviously, I can take you through a process, not talk about a specific case as such. So, all complaints received are logged and analysed, and if that analysis reveals that there are many identical complaints, then they're gathered up into one case at that time. Now, further incoming complaints then continue to be logged and analysed to see if the matter complained about remains identical, or if it's broadening out in some way, if other concerns are being added to it, in which case then the matter we're considering would be extended. And that's an ongoing process. We don't know when the complaints have finished, so they just keep coming in and we keep logging and analysing them. But the office is very small. I have less than 10 full-time equivalent staff, and we're handling multiple statutory functions. So obviously I have to look at how we're going to administer any given matter with a view to producing best value. And where we have a number of identical complaints, I may use my discretion to consider how we will proceed, because in doing so it means I can progress an investigation faster and therefore actually act on the matter that all of these complainers are complaining about. So on reflection, the phrasing that we used in the communication concerned was unfortunate. The word accept was unhelpful, and I can confirm that all of the complaints were logged, were analysed, and if any more come in now, the same would be the case for them. We did assure all complainers that the matter was being acted on. So to conclude, unfortunate turn of phrase, and they were all logged and analysed.
Okay, so is it, just to be clear, because Section 9 of the Act says it's the duty of the Commissioner to investigate and report to the Commission on cases in which a councillor, a member of a devolved public body, might have or is alleged to have contravened the councillor's, or as the case may be, the member's code. So your duty is to investigate whether there's been a breach of the code in relationship to, for example, a councillor. If you have 5,000 complaints coming in, your duty is to investigate the substantive breaches that are being drawn to your attention of that councillor.
That's right.
So you're saying that if someone were to come in with a complaint 4 weeks after you received the initial one and it was identical, you would merely tell the complainant that their complaint is already being handled.
Yeah.
Would you, if you have large numbers of complaints, let's say, I don't know, 500 or 1,000, once you've resolved the complaint, or once you've done your job, would you then contact all of those complainers to notify them?
Again, that's the point of this communication that we're discussing, that if one has a volume of complainers, often that won't be the one communication. There'll be telephone calls, there'll be emails asking for an update, perhaps sending in clips from media, etc. So there can be a huge barrage of incoming traffic that one needs to handle. So therefore, this approach that we're referring to in this question was a means to reduce that volume of traffic and to get on with actually handling the actual complaint. So that in that way then the complainer the complaint numbers are reduced. The matter goes to the Standards Commission as a breach. The Standards Commission has the power to publish, and the matter is heard, so it's in the public domain, and that is the way in which all of the complainers, the thousands potentially, can hear about the outcome of the matter.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just come in the back of that before I move on to Annabelle? Is this a different way of working from the previous Commissioner?
honestly don't know. The thing that's the same is that identical complaints are added together in one case. I don't know about the administration
Right,
side of
okay.
it, if that's
So
something that's
this-
altered. It's you know, a way of dealing with administration and with the computer system and the allocation of case numbers. It's just a way to control it
Yeah.
so that it doesn't spin out.
Yeah, I get that. So this would have no bearing then on the fact that you've managed to close the backlog of cases that were left hanging over from the previous commissioner?
The volume matters I'm talking about are new complaints.
Right, okay. Okay, just one last point on it then. Is there a case that occasionally you might not deal with a case because you're too busy?
Oh, well, no, because they come in and they're logged and put in a queue and we'll work through them in chronological order unless there's another priority matter that comes in and moves them out of that. Or there could be a conflict of interest in a staff member, you know, so the next person available has a conflict and can't work on that particular complaint or something. So, you know, we take all of these considerations in, but no, I don't see how that would be possible to come in through a system. It's automated.
Yeah, there's dealing with things and dealing with things, but isn't there? I mean, you can either dig into something or you can give it, you know, a quick glance over or something. I mean, it's just, we go back to that statement that Andy was talking about, and it does suggest that, you know, administer a case in a given manner with a view optimising administrative efficacy means that in some cases you won't be taking up the time to do what you would be doing in other cases.
Sorry, could I just explain that? No, I'm talking simply about the administration of the case. The administration is completely different than the assessment of the case, and I think we're conflating the two words here. So the administration is the emailing back and forward, the taking the phone calls, the looking to see the new copies of tweets, etc., on the matter that might be sent in from 100, 200, 500, whatever the number of complainers are. That's completely different than the assessment process. Now, I've put in place an assessment process which is detailed. I've put together a checklist for the assessment process. We have trained all the investigation team in the use of that assessment process. We discuss the assessments to ensure we're reaching the right outcome at our meetings every day. We have a robust audit trail that's produced by that.
Yeah, I get all that, but if
my answer would be no, definitely
but
not.
if you're telling people there's no point in contacting us about this sexual harassment by a councillor because we're already dealing with it, there's the opportunity there for you to be missing out on very important information.
Sorry, no, because it happens the other way around. As I say, the case is still logged and analysed to see if there are any different concerns being raised or if it's simply the original concern.
So how do you explain then unable to accept any further complaints?
Well, that's what I said. It was an unfortunate turn of phrase that was used and did not reflect the fact that every complaint was being logged and analysed to see if it was broadening out or if any new concerns were being raised. That's what I've been trying to explain. So,
Okay,
no,
right.
I can put your mind at rest on that, Convener.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Annabelle now.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Turning to an area where I understand not only are there a number of complaints, but actually a breach is often found in these cases, and that concerns failure to declare or register an interest on the part of councillors. And I just wonder, because we had discussed this important area with the previous Commissioner, I recall at an evidence session, and we had wondered what guidance was available for councillors and what proactive approaches councils took so that councillors were aware of the ins and outs of what the guidance actually means. And I just wonder, in your term of office thus far, what evidence have you come across of councils actually seeking to get to grips with this and ensuring that their councillors are properly advised so that they in turn can properly declare, register as appropriate?
Well, In terms of my dealing with it, obviously I'm seeing it when it comes in the complaint format. The development that has occurred in relation to declaration of interest and registration of interest is that the area is simplified in the revised code, and so the coverage is reduced and simplified, which hopefully will give councillors more clear instructions on how to proceed in what is definitely an important area. However, my comment on it would be that in terms of low-level behaviour where something has been missed by a councillor, but that no one's either been advantaged or disadvantaged by such a small matter. For example, forgetting that you have a share in a dormant company, something like this. That was the example my predecessor gave, and still true. So I would question the proportionality of that being turned into a breach report and being elevated to national level. And, you know, it just seems to be where no one has been advantaged or disadvantaged through what's obviously an inadvertent breach. I find myself frustrated not to be able to simply write a letter to the council and councillor concerned and ask for the situation to be remedied and remind them of best practice going forward to ensure code compliance. I think that would be the best value way and proportionate public interest way to deal with the matter. You know, and there are various simple mechanisms we could have to make sure that the fact that advice has been given to the councillor was made known, you know, to those involved. So I would like to see that, if that was ever possible, if a change in powers was possible, I would like to see that, because it seems to me that the councillors are busy, and where there's an inadvertent slip which hurts no one, that would be the way forward.
Well, that's very interesting, and I would hope that local authorities would be listening to those comments. With regard, however, to those circumstances, those complaints where actually the conduct involves a serious breach, is the trend that is decreasing, or staying this flatlining, or increasing?
I anecdotally could say I would imagine it's remaining similar, but given that this is my first year in post, it's difficult for me to compare and contrast. So again, I would offer to write to the members with the statistics on the breakdown of the complaint nature at the end of the year and at the end of the accounting year, and that would give you a better feel for trends.
So that would be very helpful, yeah, thank you.
Certainly, if a breach is found, obviously it's the details contained within a breach report, which is then submitted to the tribunal.
Okay, well, that would be very helpful, I think, because obviously if it is, I mean, it won't ever be exclusively linked to a failure to understand guidance or whatever, but obviously if there are instances where it is genuinely just a failure to understand what the guidance is, I think it is incumbent on councils to ensure that there's a duty of care to their councillors in terms of reasonable measures that can be taken. And I think that would be an important one to keep an eye on. Turning, if I may, to a different issue, that's the draft code of conduct. Now, we had an update from the Minister yesterday to advise that there has been this working group and that they hope to have a final draft of the code. Well, they hope to actually release the code for consultation in April for a 12-week consultation. I just wonder, it seems that you've had the opportunity, Commissioner, to feed in your views, and I wonder if you're able to share with the committee some of the key highlights of what you would be hoping to see.
Surely we have been involved, and my colleague has been very involved in the review of the revised code of conduct, so I'll let Mr Campbell respond if you, that's
Thank you. Yeah, we were involved in the process in terms of engaging with monitoring officers and other stakeholders around particular parts, and we've also given our comments on the final draft. I suppose at the start it's worth recognising that the code's a product of many different stakeholders, and we don't have the final say on it. In terms of the kind of main highlights, in our view, the readability's been improved greatly. There's been a change in language to the first person, that I will, and we think that's important in fostering a culture where people take personal ownership, that it's their code and their conduct. And touching upon what the member just mentioned previously, there's been a real simplification of the Declaration of Interest sections where it's been before this committee before. It appeared that there was subtle rewordings of the same test almost half a dozen times, so that section has really been stripped back, which will hopefully help with the issue that you identified.
Okay, so it's you feel optimistic that the key points you were hoping to have covered will be reflected in the text that will be put out to consultation.
We've given some specific comments on
Yeah.
particular parts of the code, and it goes back to that point of we wouldn't have the final say, but
Sure.
we've certainly been able to have our voice heard
Well,
in
that's
the
good.
process.
Excellent. So we'll wait and see what the text reveals. Convener, thank you.
Thank you very much. Sarah, you wanted to come in on planning, and then Graham, were you going to come back on some stuff?
Yes, can do.
Right, okay, thank you.
I just wanted to pick up on in the section 1 on performance report, there's a table about the nature of complaints. And one of the things that stands out is people who've complained about misconduct on individual planning applications. And it's quite a large number of complaints. And it was just to get a sense of whether that's grown or that's stabilised from last year, because I understand in feedback to the committee last year, it was identified that planning was the biggest single source of complaints. So it was really just to get an overview of that. We've had quite a lengthy planning act passed in the last year, and it was also to ask whether that's made any difference in terms of the nature of complaints.
Thank you, Member. Anecdotally, I would not say that it was the biggest single source of complaints, and I'd want to cross-reference that with Mr. Campbell. Would you? Yes.
Yes, and I think the table from the previous year's account shows that the move is more towards a kind of respect and courtesy side of complaints, and planning sort of taking a back seat to that issue.
So so it's a lower proportion this year. Are there still the same kind of numbers of complaints, or have the actual numbers of complaints gone down as well?
Don't have the numbers of that to hand, but it's something we could get back to the committee.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Graham?
Thanks, Convener. Can I just, if I go back to this disrespect thing, which we've raised before in this committee, it's quite. I mean, I think I made the example last year. I use the same example. I could say something about Mr. Gibson at the end there, and he could take umbrage. Again, he could take umbrage at that. He's not the type to take umbrage, but let's say he did. And yet I meant no harm by whatever comment it was, but he could then run off to you and make a complaint about me because he had a particularly thin skin, which he doesn't. You know, that sort of complaint, that is a waste of everyone's time, is it not?
Thus, I'm trying to capture it within my filtered new complaint form to advise that generally, if there was a political nexus to the communication between the two persons involved, that the views shared would fall away under Article 10.
Right.
So that's what I'm trying to create, some sort of filtering mechanism. We'll see how well it works. No doubt it'll need a number of tweaks as we go along, but that's why I'm trying to develop a filter within the form as being the obvious place that I can see to engage with my complainers and to manage the expectation, you know, that they've put a complaint in, but yet something that, you know, your colleague here thinks is very offensive, in fact, is covered if it's a political complaint and doesn't stray into other areas where coverage under Article 10 wouldn't apply. So obviously I don't want my complaint form to be 30 pages long, you know, so just cutting to the chase, as it were, to try to filter out these main areas.
So you're trying to weed that type of thing out?
I think we're not doing ourselves any favour to take in complaints which are likely to fall away. I think the complainers have their expectations let down then, you know, so I would rather engage with them at that early stage.
Yeah.
Rather than them invest the time and effort to put together a package of a complaint with supporting documentation, you know, So I think that's a better point to engage initially through the forum.
That sounds sensible. But are you seeing any upsurge in people who are making complaints about comments that are made on social media?
Well, certainly it's a constant in our incoming complaints. You know, events can occur which bring in a large volume. So our only one or two people sometimes pick up a tweet or a comment. So yes, that continues to feature. And I don't see that there's any change in the revised code around that sort of material. So the main issue in investigating it is always this: were you acting as a counsellor? Were you perceived to be acting as a counsellor? You know, that issue. And there's no change as far as I could see on a read of the code in respect of that matter. Certainly because I can only imagine it'll grow. It's here to stay, the social media. And certainly it is a high risk platform, but obviously politicians elected representatives have to use it. So that being the case, I've identified that in the strategic plan, and we're looking to invest in some training that I understand is available to assist us in that area going forward.
All right. You mentioned earlier you'd like the ability to issue a simple advice letter to councillors if they've inadvertently got something wrong, which sounds sensible to me. So I guess that would need a change to, well, the rules around your job. Have you had any discussions with ministers about that?
We haven't had discussion with ministers. My colleague kindly worked up a paper in relation to that matter, and it's certainly something that I would be happy to approach minister and have a conversation in regards to.
Sorry, who's the paper for?
Well, to look at the concept and then to advance it to any interested party. I wanted to see if anything came through in the revised code that might impact it and go from there. So it seemed to be the...
I mean, the code really is about, the code is for councillors and how they behave. This is about how you take that forward.
That's true. Would we need, sorry, it's a while since I looked at that paper, would we need a legislative change to enact that?
Yeah, the context of the paper was that the Standards Commission were looking at reducing the amount of public hearings for what they would class as technical breaches, and we put in a paper somewhat expanding that. The power could be given us to make the decision, because we have all the evidence and whether it's a contravention and what sanction might be appropriate. And then the Standards Commission acts as a check and balance, in effect, on reviewing that in the papers, was the suggestion we put forward, to move to any situation where we have a greater control in what the outcome of the case is and what the sanction or penalty, or whatever phrase you want to apply to it, that would require a change to the primary legislation, because it's not something we're empowered to do under the current Act.
Might be, could you share that with us, that paper?
Yes, surely.
Yeah,
yes.
that'd be useful.
Sorry, just if I could slightly expand for a moment. It's just, I think it's very poor use of public funds for ourselves to go to a hearing, Standards Commission to be there.
yeah.
We're the only one present because the councillor has accepted the matter. You know, so we're there on our own. It seems,
Goes back to what we said earlier. It's a really complicated landscape,
yeah.
and anything that could simplify it would be good. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much. Can I just thank you then, Commissioner, and your colleagues for attending today's session. And I now suspend the meeting. Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 3 is a consideration of public petition PE 1719 on review of fire safety stay put policy by Rachel Gibson, calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the current stay put policy as it applies to the fire strategy for existing multi-storey residential buildings. We last considered this position at our meeting on 8th of January 2020 and agreed to consider the issues raised in the petition during our evidence session with the Scottish Government on building safety and fire regulations on 22nd of January. An outline of the issues covered during that session is set out in the attached paper from the Clerk, alongside previous related committee work by this committee and the Public Petitions Committee. Recent submissions from the Scottish Government and the petitioner are at the back of the paper, and a late submission from the petitioner received on Monday is now online and has been tabled today. I invite comments from members, including what action, if any, it wishes to take in relation to this petition. Any comments?
Yes, Convener, thank you. Just looking at the late submission of documents annexed to our papers today and reflecting on our discussions thus far, it seems an issue of relevance is the research that's being undertaken, and in all circumstances I feel that we should proceed to close the petition. However, at the same time, I think it would be of general import beyond simply the confines of this petition to obtain an update, perhaps by way of a letter from the Chief Officer of the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, just clarifying where we are now in terms of stay put, because it is an operational matter for the SFRS in Scotland. So, in summary, I would think we could close, but as a separate action point, because it involves a wider audience, perhaps seek this update from the SFRS.
Okay, does anybody have any other views? No?
Agree with that. Seems a sensible way forward. Convene.
Okay, yeah, I've got to say I agree with that as well. Also, I know that this property is within my constituency. I'd be happy to visit it and maybe with both hats on, but certainly as a local MSP, and then I can report back. Okay, in that case, that concludes the public. We've agreed to close the committee. The petition, right? Close the committee, that'd be nice. Close the petition. We'll write to the SFRS and I'll take a visit to the premises. Thank you very much then. That concludes the public part of today's meeting, and I now move the meeting into private.